The
illustrious Jabba bids you welcome. I'm going to regret this.
I'm Pete Mitchell. He's Peyton Jones. And this is the Church Planter Podcast, brought to you by Church Planter Magazine. Hey, Church Planter, this is Pete Mitchell.
And this is Peyton Jones.
And you're listening to the ever lovely Church Planter Podcast.
Again.
And it's a mistake that you only make once, but thank you for coming back twice.
Hey, fool you once, shame on you. Fool you twice, shame on you again.
So anyway, guys, we have a little bit of a different podcast today. We've got a man who knows me from my childhood. And by childhood, I mean college years, because let's face it, I never was,
Didn't know that.
I never grew up. I was still a child in college.
That I know.
And in fact, we were on RA staff together, weren't we, Ryan? Or was it at different times?
No, we were together.
Yeah. Can you believe I was an RA at Biola University of all places?
What's RA?
Resident assistant, baby. I was in charge of my floor.
What? Oh, you totally Eddie Haskell that.
Dude, I remember
hello, Dean. It's lovely to see you today, Dean. Might I say you're looking marvelous, Dean.
This one particular night, we were throwing a tennis ball down the hall, right? Just like, I don't know what we were thinking. We had all of the guys on one side, which had a wall behind him, and one guy on the other side, which had a window behind him. And we would just try and beam the ball back and forth as fast or as hard as we could. And finally, it gets past the single guy, and goes right through the window. Like it was a perfect round hole in the window. I'm the RA, right? You're not supposed to allow that kind of stuff. So I go running in my room because I had no shoes on. I put on my flip-flops, and I come out and I go, "What did you guys do?" But,
man, that is so good.
I had good times in college. But anyway, Ryan Lowe is our guest. Ryan, tell us again, what is the church that you pastor?
I'm pastor of Sunland Neighborhood Church out in Los Angeles, California.
Nice. Yeah. So you're living in LA County right now.
Yes, we are.
So your quarantine is worse than mine in Orange County.
Yeah, it's pretty intense.
They keep extending it there in LA County, and my wife works in Lakewood, and Lakewood just announced that they're extending theirs an extra 60 days. So she's like, "I'm not going back to work until September now." And I'm like, "Sweet, we make more money off of unemployment. Stay off work. Stay off work."
Yeah, I mean, I think it was yesterday I sat down to drive to church just to do something, to an errand. And so I'm sitting down in behind the wheel, and I'm thinking to myself, dude, I haven't been in my car for 2 days. So I've just been stuck in my house, so it's been strange. It's been a really weird time.
The last time I filled up my car with gas was right before the lockdown happened. So
are you serious?
Yeah. I mean, I literally,
wow.
I haven't filled up since what was that? March 14th, 13th is when I filled up. And then the next day we went into lockdown. So
that's amazing.
It's been crazy. Yeah.
Wow.
But anyway, so the reason why I asked Ryan to come on is Ryan's a pastor, and he was writing these great, fantastic posts on Facebook. And of course, we all know that I am definitely the high mark when it comes to intelligent posts on Facebook. As everybody who's seen my posts know, I'm pretty much just the ruler of memes. But anyway.
The keeper of memes, all rise.
And any fights that I can possibly start on Facebook, as I've lost absolutely all ability to control myself during this quarantine.
Yes. But in your defense, you were left unsupervised on Facebook for a while.
Well, yeah, I certainly have been. So anyway, the reason I wanted to have Ryan on is these posts that he was sharing about. He was sharing about his own struggles and his experience suffering from anxiety and having panic attacks and things of that nature. And over the years, I've known people who've had panic attacks. I don't know that I've really known someone who's suffered from anxiety, at least the way that you described it, Ryan. And I was looking at that going, first of all, I know a lot of our church planners, our pastors who've reached out to us over the years suffer from a lot of different issues. And one of the things that Peyton and I have said so many times is that being a pastor is a very lonely job because there's not a lot of people who you can reach out to. There's not a lot of people who you can share certain things with. I mean, one of the things that we started, Ryan, a few years ago that we don't do right now was called the BIVO Inner Circle for bivocational pastors. And one of the big things that we found with the group was the thing that they really wanted the most was, like, I teach people, here's how you make money, right? Because that's my strength. I know how to make money. I know how to start your own business, how to get more clients, that kind of a thing. What they really needed was a community of other like-minded people that they could share their problems with, because they couldn't share them like with anybody in their church. They couldn't share them a lot of times with other staff members because sometimes their problem was with another staff member, and it's like, I can't talk to them about, there's only one other person on staff, and hey, I got a real problem with him, and it's of course the guy you're sharing that with. It doesn't work that well, and so I was reading your post, going, man, this is something that I think would help a lot of our guys. For them to hear someone else who's gone through this. I mean, I know a lot of our pastors who've reached out to me who've suffered from depression, bipolar, all kinds of different stuff. And it's just, there's not a lot of people who they can talk to. And I think Peyton and I are two of the rare guys out there who are like, look, man, we don't hold anything over your head. That's an issue that you got to deal with, and we're here to help you any way we can. And we're not here to judge you or make you feel like crap. So I'm grateful that you're willing to come on and share this with us. And before we get into that, one of the first questions that we always like to start out with when we do an interview with someone is, tell everyone real quick, if you can, your story of how you came to faith, and then what caused you, in your case, to become a pastor.
Yeah. So, my parents took me to church when I was a kid. And so I grew up around the church, and probably around the age of 14, I was at a high school winter camp, and a guy was up there, preaching hellfire and brimstone. And I was like, okay, I need to make this business arrangement with God so that way I can go to heaven, So I walk forward and pray, and then my thought was, after that, I'm just going to return to my life as normal, so God can have my eternity, and I can have my the rest of my life. And obviously, the Lord had different ideas, and so began me on a different course and a different path. And but I was in college, and I was studying to be a teacher, and I was going to be a teacher and a coach, but at the same time, if you remember, people, when we were at Biola, they would kind of require you to do a community service. And so I had to do these community services, and basically it was through my church.
I managed to find a way out of everything, including the 3-time-a-week chapel. I'm just going to say, you got to have mad skills.
Now the RA makes sense. That was Pete's community service requirement right there,
exactly.
baby.
And cleaning up broken windows, so.
I didn't clean it up. No. I was there to punish those that were responsible.
You just stood around and practiced indignation and dirty, who did this, and did that for a while, and then someone else came and cleaned it up.
Yeah. So I was in college and was working in youth ministry, and just began to feel like, man, this is where the Lord's calling me to be. And so I've been in ministry on and off for different types of ministries for the last 30 years. And so maybe more like 27, 28. But yeah, so I've done youth ministry, worship ministry. I worked at Biola as a resident director. So I was like the boss of Pete for about 10 years.
What dorm?
Hart Hall.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I actually had a resident assistant that was just like you.
So a good quality person, someone who is proud to be a resident assistant, no doubt.
Yeah, I did his wedding. They have 2 kids. He's a lawyer now.
So he was the smart version of Pete. I got you. All right. That's cool. Hey, one of the things too that I read on your Facebook that I thought was really interesting, you were sharing about you were a youth pastor and you really were questioning your own faith, questioning Christianity. And the way you wrote it on Facebook was something along the lines of, is this Jesus thing really real? All while you're still a youth pastor at the same time. And then you found Ravi, what's his last name? Zachariah. How does he say his last name? Yeah, it is Zacharias. Yeah. And a lot of those things really made sense to you because you were like, man, maybe as a Christian, I'm just supposed to forget all the tough questions and not ask them, because I'm just supposed to take it all on faith and that sort of a thing. Tell us a little bit about that journey of just that questioning the whole Christianity and is this real? That kind of a thing.
Yeah. For me, I think I'm a pretty skeptical person naturally. And so I definitely think I'm the kind of person who could easily fall for conspiracy theories. But then at the same time, I'm also someone who would look at it and go, no, I don't think so. I have a deep skepticism towards people, and that makes me susceptible to conspiracy theories. But then at the same time, I have a very skeptical side towards, I don't believe much of anything. I'm a pretty kind of a difficult sell in that sense. And so I think with Christianity, I grew up in the church. And so there was this sense of this is who I am. This is my identity. And so as I was growing up and, I grew up in a Baptist church. And so there was I felt like there was just a lot of messages that would kind of come through my upbringing that were just kind of like, hey, listen, faith is something you have to have. And in spite of all the overwhelming evidence against what you believe, and then growing up in the world that I grew up in, which was basically, a lot of skepticism all around me. And I'm a natural skeptical person too. And so I think as time went on, it grew harder and harder for me to hold this position of Christianity while I was inside my mind, there's just more and more doubts that were building up. And then there's this voice of saying, hey, you don't really have a right to question God. You just, just trust, just faith, just have faith, So I think that was probably something for me that really hit me in college. And there were several books that really came my way and that started helping and then really started hitting me after college. Like when I left, and around the same time, I started having I started dealing with sexual addiction, and so it's just a lot of my woundedness as a young man, and a lot of my everything just seemed to come together in a perfect storm at that point. There was doubt, there was addiction, and at the same time, I'm a youth pastor, so
right.
So I'm dealing with all of that stuff, and Ravi Zacharias' work just really came in and was a huge ministry to me because I didn't really realize that there was a great deal of rational defense for the Christian faith. And so to me, it was just this huge moment of discovery, to sit there and just go, Lord, man, this is awesome. I can actually, there actually is a problem or an answer to the question of evil and suffering in the world. I don't have to just sit there and go, well, God, I don't know. I don't have an answer, but I just believe, and that it was so comforting to my soul, and I often say nowadays, apologetics to me isn't so much about defending the faith as it is, although it is, but it really, for me, it creates a deeper worship of God because I find that I'm just more in awe of him. Like when I look at science and I look at philosophy and those things, and Ravi Zacharias is a huge part of that journey for me, just huge.
Mm. Just resonating with that. I think it's why people look at C.S. Lewis and they hear someone intelligently communicating about something that, really at a certain stage, everybody has to make a leap of faith. And I think what people that are secularists try to present is that they themselves have not made a leap of faith, that somehow rationality leads them to the faith that the world created itself. And that is a faith, because as you cannot prove Christianity to be true, you cannot prove the secularist position to be true by rationality. And so, everybody has to make that leap of faith. I mean, I think Christians, if we're honest, we look at the historical claims, we look at the evidence. You still have to make a leap of faith. You still have to interpret that evidence and make that leap of faith. So no one could ever be rationalized into it. But to hear a rational appeal, Christianity is rational. My best friend from childhood, he went on to become a Reformed epistemologist. And for those of you that don't know what epistemology is, it's the study of philosophy, which the discipline is, how do you know what you know, right? Like the validity of belief systems. And he actually lost his faith at a certain point, where he stopped believing in God. And he went into epistemology thinking, I'll go in and I'll believe in God. By becoming a reformer, it'll help me because I'm really struggling with my faith. Turns out, like so many people, his wandering away or his crisis of faith was more emotional than rational. Mm-hmm. And so in a way, he kind of came to the point, well, it didn't prove it for me. But I remember when he's now since like come back and, full speed ahead going for the Lord. But
You froze.
I froze?
You're back.
What? You froze. I didn't freeze. You froze. Dang it. How much did you lose of what I said?
No, it's just like the last
team
couple
ahead.
of seconds.
Yeah.
It was like I broke down. I cried. It was beautiful. I can't reproduce that moment. So I remember him looking at me at one stage and just saying, I may not believe Christianity, but I will tell you, in every belief system out there, it is literally the most rational belief system on the planet. And that was his, and he had studied under Alvin Plantinga's protege. Like he had studied under some of the big boys. He was at Purdue, Notre Dame, and he had been there. He'd done some big research, and but I'll never forget that, him saying in all honesty, look, I don't believe, but I'll tell you, out of all the belief systems out there, Christianity is the most rational belief system. It's the most valid from a rationalistic, if you're just looking at logic and critical logics, like mathematics, logic and critical thinking, that's it.
Yeah. So Ryan, tell us a little bit about, for those who don't understand what anxiety is, what is it? When did it start for you? Is it something you had as a kid? Is it something that developed later in life? I mean, tell us what the problem is, so to speak. What is it? And then we'll start going from there.
Yeah. Well, I guess I can speak from my experience as far as anxiety is concerned, because I think it shows up differently for some folks than it does for me. But I guess it's interesting because I was just thinking about this, even talking about college, how I think even it was showing up back then, and for me, anxiety is this sense.
Don't tell me it was me. Don't tell me I'm the one who gave you anxiety.
No, you didn't.
Okay. All right.
You're the one that gave me anxiety.
Well, that's true.
But yeah, I think it was showing up for me back then. Anxiety, I think, for me is a little bit of a this sense that something is wrong. Something is, and something is going to go wrong. Something is wrong, and there's a lot of things that are attached to that in the sense of like, I've got to fix that, and I've got no one's going to help me. You have a lot of, for me, anxiety shows up in a lot of a flood of thoughts and a really just a sense of dread and a nervousness and a real deep sense of something is wrong with me and something is wrong with the world. Something's going to go wrong. And so I think even back then when I was a youth pastor and I was starting to get into sexual addiction stuff, especially pornography and masturbation. And so I was starting to get really deep into that stuff. And I think for me, as that stuff was coming into my life, most of it was a response to the anxiety that I was experiencing. And but it just took years to really kind of begin to weed through all of that. And then over the last 5 years, the anxiety has really hit hard. Pornography is not a part of my life anymore. And that's not to say it isn't a temptation, but it's not a part of my life. And what
Can I pause you for a second there?
Yeah.
And just highlight that I think that's really important, Ryan, that pornography is not a part of my life. It doesn't have to be a part of your life. And I think that in today's culture and society, it's funny because pornography and anxiety go hand in hand. The more, it's like drugs. The more drugs you do, the more your anxiety gets worse, right? You take it to deal with the anxiety. When you come off that drug, it's worse. It's the same with pornography. The more pornography that you dive into, the worse the anxiety gets. And you do the pornography to deal with the anxiety. But I just want to highlight that because I don't think we hear that enough, Ryan. Somebody saying, yeah, it was a thing and it's not anymore. And I just think people need to hear that is possible, that freedom from pornography is real and it can be the greater reality, even for someone just completely immersed in it right now. So thanks for sharing that, man.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, no, it's a huge part of me getting out of and starting to get some victory with pornography was the fact that the Spirit really intervened and said, you need to start telling people. And the first people he told me to tell were actually some of my students in my youth group, which was really, I'm not sure I would advise that to people, but in my situation, in my specific situation, that was what God had led me to do. And so I told them, and we had this big moment of everybody confessing. It was like a big confess-a-rama as a result of that. And from there, this was like, I don't even know, 20 something years ago, we started, doing an accountability group. And I mean, those things have been around forever, but back then for us, it was like, we didn't really know. We're just like, maybe we should meet and kind of talk about what's going on. And, and then for me, it was just like, I need to I want to know what's happening with me. And that's like a big question that's been true for me ever since. It's just like, Lord, I want to know what the heck is going on with me. Help me understand my own heart, search my heart, And so I guess to answer your original question, Pete, I think anxiety is just this feeling, for me, the way it shows up is this feeling of dread, this feeling of something is wrong. I am wrong. I have to fix it. No one's going to help me. And if things aren't turning out the way I want them to, that's my fault, and it's something that I did. It's, and then the physical symptoms for me are just this general feeling of of dread, and also of I can't breathe. And so that's the one that's really terrifying. Is I feel like I can't get a satisfying breath. I feel like my chest is stuffed with cotton, and so it's like I'm trying to breathe and. And I just can't get that deep, satisfying breath. And, or, you get dizzy. That hit me when I was preaching. I thought I was going to faint. It was just terrifying, and everybody in the church just kind of sat there looking at me like going, is he going to faint? And I'm thinking to myself, if I lean back too far, my head's going to fall off my shoulders. I'm going to faint. I'm going to collapse right here in front of everybody. And so the chairman of my elder board, he's thinking, Ryan, just sit down on the steps, and I'm thinking, if I sit down, I'm going to faint. So I'm just holding onto the pulpit for dear life and gutting it through this sermon, so anxiety just shows up and it can be quite overwhelming and quite, especially those panic attacks. They're really terrible. So
I remember reading one of your first, Peyton, he's putting out on Facebook like these really long, I would call them dissertation level because, I'm not really much of a reader. I think we could all pretty much assume. And, they have more than 3 paragraphs. So there are these longer posts on Facebook.
500 word blogs, Pete.
Pretty much. Yeah. And And one of the first ones that I read, I don't remember if it was the actual first one or not, but to me, it really demonstrated his willingness to be vulnerable. And Ryan, you talked about one of your big fears being that of death. And you're like, I'm totally scared of death, and I'm a pastor, and I'm not supposed to be scared of death. And it was amazing to me because I'm reading this, because one, I'm thinking, I can't believe you had the guts to share that, because I don't know really any pastor who'd be willing to share that, because that's like you said, I mean, as a pastor, most people be like, you can't be afraid of death. I mean, we've been told we've been given victory over death and blah, 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 all this other, right? And I'm also reading it thinking, at the same time, for me, it's actually a fear that I literally can't relate to. The idea of being afraid of death. To me, what is way scarier is being mangled and living, right? Rather than, dying. Because I almost look at it and go, well, worst case scenario, I go to hell. That sucks. Best case scenario, I go to heaven. But what if the whole thing is not true and it's just nothingness? Well, I can deal with nothingness. The idea of death being, okay, well, it's all over. I could actually deal with that easier than, obviously going to hell, which everything you read in the Bible, it doesn't sound like a good place to be. It's not the party we all like to make it sound like it is. And, but anyway, so tell us a little bit about some of these different struggles that you have, like, the fear of death. And like, are you able to even talk to anyone about that other than now you've put it out on Facebook? So,
for everybody,
Yeah.
Yeah. I think one of the things that's been, that became apparent to me as time went on, and I wanted to write about this for people, is that, especially for those of us who grew up in the church, sometimes there's this sense of there's certain things you really cannot admit. You're not really allowed to admit. And I kind of want to free people up to admit that. If a pastor can say, hey, at times I'm scared to death, like that's really a big, we're all in the middle of our life. I'm 40, I just turned 46. So the middle of my life is probably over. I'm probably past it by now, especially judging by the way I eat. I'm probably towards the last quarter of my life. So, but when I don't know, for some reason over this last 5 years, there's just been this sense in me of my mortality, and this sense of like, yeah, my body is not what it used to be, and I am going to die. And that thought kind of frightens me, and it's forced me to kind of look at what frightens me about it. Cause you're right. Like if there's no God, and I've really thought about this, if he's not there, and then I won't know it. I won't wake up 150,000 years from now and go, oh man, like, dude, I was wrong, and the regret. Like I won't, I won't know he's not there. I won't care. I won't, so there's this sense of like, yeah, in that case, that's true. But yet for some reason, there's this fear. And there's this movie I saw a long time ago, and it's called The Four Feathers. And in the movie, the guy says, I've lost everything, and yet I'm still afraid. And then his friend says, fear always remains. And it hit me. It was like, yeah, I mean, that's really true for me. I am afraid. I had my youth pastor, recently, because we've had so many pastors, who have taken their lives because of, being depressed and things like that. And I had my youth pastor, and he was like, I'm really worried for you, Pastor Ryan. Have you thought of taking your life? And he's asked me that. And I said, I don't ever want to say that I'm above or beyond that possibility of happening in my life. I don't ever want to say that that's something that I couldn't land there, but that's really not true for me right now. I'm so afraid of dying. Death is not something I want to happen. And in my worst moments with anxiety, I feel like I'm dying. And so there's this sense of like, I'm dying. I'm going to leave my kids here without a dad. I'm going to, all these things that I'm starting to wrestle with. And my wife's going to have to get remarried, and all this. I don't want that, and So I think that
My wife would never find a guy as good as me, so I'm totally safe.
Oh, dude, she's got it so made. No doubt. I think that about podcasting. I will never find a podcast host like Pete Mitchell.
she should thank you. Like she should come in and
She really should. She really
Like,
should.
I thank you, Pete. I mean, she should take
Thank
a
you
number.
for choosing me. That's
Yes.
that's what I want to hear from her.
I remember Pete once saying that about the Lord, that when God picked him, he got a great deal.
Oh,
And that was, yes, many Pharisees have thought that over the years, that same thought. Great men of God have thought.
Sorry, we didn't mean to totally derail you there, Ryan.
This is what we do.
Fine.
Welcome to the podcast. And
That's
all you guys listening again, suckers.
No, I think I've taken a lot of comfort from Jesus in the garden, from him going, "Hey, Lord, Father, if there's any way out of this, if there's any other way to do this, can you take this cup from me?" I mean, he's moving to the cross in total obedience and in total love. But there's this sense of watching that going, I think the dude in that moment doesn't entirely want to die. It's like there's this sense of, I don't want to be tortured and mangled and die, and as I'm not prancing through a field of daisies going, "Ooh, good, lucky for me, lucky me, I get to die." It's like, so I think for me, it took a lot of, for me, it's felt a lot of comfort in that sense of like, yeah, I don't have to hide some of these realities of me, because I'm pretty sure we're all there. And that's part of the faith journey, is sitting there going, yeah, Lord, I am afraid of that. And you still love me in the middle of that, and I believe, help my unbelief. I am scared. I am Peter, who's protecting his own skin on the night that, Jesus is betrayed, and a little girl is saying, "Hey, weren't you with Jesus?" And Peter's like cussing and saying, "No, I wasn't." It's like, I'm like him,
Right.
and I'm human. And I don't want, I want people to, around me to kind of get a sense of the fact that we're human, and that's okay to be human. And, we live out being human in our journey as Christians, like that's part of it.
I gotta think that that's kind of the key, though, right? We somehow in Christianity, we backed ourselves into a corner where we feel that in order to be used of God, you must be almost super holy. Now, don't get me wrong. I do think there are scriptures that say, "Hey, cleanse yourself of the latter," like, getting free from porn, where Paul says, "Cleanse yourself so you're useful for every good work." But nowhere does the Bible say that you can't be human. In fact, it kind of emphasizes the opposite. So like Paul, he can't really get going until he has that thorn in the flesh, like until he's kind of broken, right? Like wouldn't you say we're a lot like horses, where God has to break us? I got all this figured out, and I'm this and I'm all that. And kind of like Peter gets broken like a horse, and then he's super useful when he understands his own humanity. I always trip out that it's Peter, that the guy who screwed up more than anyone besides Judas, who was dead. Peter, I mean, you couldn't screw up any worse than Judas, but like I said, he was dead. But the one that was living, that no one had screwed up like Peter, he is the one that gets to stand up at Pentecost and preach. And you kind of think, well, what about John? Like Peter did, what about him? Well, the reality is that God's like, no, I did a work in you. I showed you who you were. So that, and Paul says that, didn't he? That the humanity, my own humanity, I will boast in my weakness. Now I know who I am. I know my weakness. And this is Paul. And I don't think this gets emphasized or preached enough, that we can be super, super, super weak, and that the power of the Holy Spirit, that treasure in a jar of clay, the one who is strong when I am weak, that makes it okay, that the Holy Spirit himself makes it okay for me to be afraid. Like Paul says, pray for me that I'd have boldness. But he's saying, I don't need this to muster up my own courage. I can be Paul and be afraid. But if you pray for me, I know the Spirit will give me boldness in spite of my fear. You know, like John Wayne said, courage is being afraid, but turning up anyways. And I think that's where Paul brought himself to a lot. And so, I don't think we hear that enough, Ryan, that ability to be human. And that's the theme I'm hearing when you talk to your kids. How do you, for the person listening, they're obviously thinking, well, that's cool. Like you could do it in your youth group, but I definitely couldn't do that with my church. Because if I show my underbelly, man, they're just going to turn on me and tear me to pieces as a spiritual leader. What's been your experience with that?
Yeah, well, I've been a senior pastor for the last 10 years. And I'd tell you that one of the things that I hear from my people is how much they appreciate the fact that I'm real. Like we're studying scripture. This past Sunday, we studied a scripture. We've been talking about God's will, like knowing God's will in your life. And I've been using material from a book that I've read. And, obviously you mentioned one of the verses, this is God's will of your life. For your life, your sanctification, that is, you avoid sexual immorality, right? And so, just talking about this is a difficult verse for us to wrestle with as Americans, because this is a country that we live in that venerates and worships sex. And so this is hard, and this has been a hard part of my journey, and I had a lady talk to me afterwards. She was running slides for us, and she basically just said, I kept thinking to myself, Ryan, don't go too far. Sometimes you go too far. And so I tend to err on the side of probably full disclosure, where some people would say that may not be, the wisest choice. But for me, it's just kind of like you said, and I've said this to my church folks, I know that sometimes you don't want to hear that your pastor struggles with a certain passage, of scripture. You don't want to hear that your pastor's dealing with this. But the reality is I would rather boast in my weaknesses. And so you can, you don't need to look at me as someone who is on the same level as Jesus. You cannot look at me that way. Jesus is I'm a man, just like I'm a human, just like you guys. And, so I've been pretty open, and I think my people they appreciate that. And I mean, I don't go into every detail, but I've been open about addiction. I've been open about my anxiety. Obviously, my folks have seen me living this anxiety right in front of them as I'm nearly fainting in the pulpit. And I had Bell's palsy. And that's pretty much a stress and anxiety illness. And so my folks at Sunland have really lived with me through that. And so I think I'm just kind of a person I'm like, look, this is how I am. And I'm a kind of person who's like, this is my story. You can, if you don't like me telling my story, then there's maybe another pastor you can go listen to.
Right.
And so that's kind of the picture of where I'm at. And my people, I think, have been pretty generally appreciative about that. And they feel like, yeah, he's a normal person, who loves Jesus and is preaching the scriptures and teaching the scriptures. So,
let me ask you this. I know we're running out of time, and Peyton just had to leave. As you've been struggling with this, how did you start that? I don't want to say path to recovery, because it's not really like you recover from it, because you're going to be dealing with it. How did you broach it with your wife, your family? I know you've gone to see a doctor for it because you've done posts about medication and things like that. How did that journey start? Or was it just something that your wife always knew about, knew you always suffered from anxiety and things like that? Or, how did the recovery, and again, I don't like using the word recovery because I don't think it's really, the right term for this, but just that journey of getting a handle on this.
Yeah. And to be honest with you, I would say that I didn't start it. God did, because I had a massive, I think for me, I'm a warrior. and I push and I push and I push and I fight and I fight and I don't give up and I don't give in. That's just kind of me. And I think there's a lot of pastors like me. We're going to fix this. We're going to do this. We're going to lead the way. And then I had a panic attack in Ralph's. I had just done a kickboxing routine in my garage, one of those video workouts. And I had felt a little off during the routine, and my mind started running, maybe there's something wrong with you, which is kind of a normal anxiety kind of motif for me, but I didn't realize that. And so then I went to the store to pick up some charcoal because we were going to barbecue that night, and I was going to pick up my son. I was going to take him to the park, and so he could ride his scooter, and I could just sit there and read and have a nice, relaxing afternoon. And I'm at the store, and my mind is just going crazy, and I had this massive panic attack, and I couldn't breathe. I thought I was having a heart attack. I ended up sitting at the front of the store, my whole body going numb. And all I could feel is the pounding of my heart. And so in my mind, all I'm thinking is that pounding at any moment is going to stop, and this is me. I'm going to die. My heart, I'm having a heart attack right here in Ralph's, And so it was terrifying. It was absolutely the most terrifying experience of my life. And I ended up going to the hospital. And so my wife is sitting there, and they come in and they're like, "Mr. Lowe, you had a panic attack." It was like, really? Because I thought no, you're wrong. I'm having heart issues, And so I first started going to the doctor, and I went to get different tests, and every test was the same thing. No, yeah, you're probably a little bit on the obese side. You could probably lose some weight, and yeah, this is a panic attack. Your heart's working, and you've got a lot of anxiety problems, and so. It started making me really read about it, because again, I'm the kind of guy who's like, okay, something's not working out. I want to understand what's happening in my life. I want to understand what's going on in my soul. I want to follow you, Lord. I want to be aware. And so I was reading and just kind of reading different websites and Google searches on anxiety and all that stuff. So to answer your question, I think it was really God who just was kind of like, okay, enough. I already gave you Bell's palsy, so I got Bell's palsy probably about a year before that. And I talked to the doctor, and she said, this is a stress thing. And I said, well, what should I do? And she said, take a vacation. And I said, for how long? She says, as long as you can. It was like, so my answer to that as a pastor is, okay, I'll take 2 Sundays off, And then on the third Sunday, I'm leading worship and preaching, and I'm clearly not healed yet. Like my face is not healed up. The drum sounded like a hammer just banging into the side of my brain. It was so awful. And then after that, my breathing issues just really ramped up, and I was really struggling with that. And I still wasn't listening. I was still pushing and still pushing. And then, I have this panic attack. And the panic attack was like, really, it was my body saying no more. And I think God, who's sovereign over these moments, he was like, this is the time. This is it. This is where you're ready now for me to take you into this. And so it was definitely him. It wasn't me. I wasn't willing to, I am a guy who wants to explore things, but I'm also a guy who wants to push ahead and fight and fight and fight. And I don't want to admit that I need help. And I don't want to admit I'm weak. I don't want to admit I'm tired. And then my body just says, no more, you can't handle it. And God's like, it's time. And boom, hit me. Major panic attack. And that was the first of multiple panic attacks I began to have. I had a horrible one in the pulpit, like I was saying. I had a terrible one at a concert, a Hillsong United concert, a worship concert of all places. And it was, I love going to see them live. And it was awful. The whole concert was just terrible. It was a nightmare. And so, and then I had stretches of about 6 months where it was just about 10 hours a day of just constant panic attack. And that was as I was adjusting the medications and stuff. And it was just it was really really, really difficult. It was
Right.
really, really awful.
What would you
Yeah.
suggest to someone who is thinking, hey, you know what? I haven't been diagnosed with anything, but a lot of the things that Ryan's sharing, I can relate to those. What would you say to them would be, the steps that they should start taking right now?
Yeah. Well, I think one thing is to really, really be honest about it, and find places to be honest about it. I think we've been talking about that a lot in this, to really be able to have people to lean on and say, okay, this is going on with me. The Lord brought a lot of different resources for me through this experience to these last 5 years. I've had 2 different therapists through this last 5 years, plus a spiritual director. And my current therapist has been extremely helpful. My first therapist was really helpful. And so that is just, especially to have that, has been so good for me, just to have an environment where I can, like we were talking about, just unload things without judgment. I'm not sacrificing my leadership ability, making, because I'm saying this to the wrong person. Like, this is my therapist, I can say whatever, and I think there's a lot we can do to kind of take care of ourselves and to be good to ourselves, and whether that's getting right sleep, getting good exercise, eating. Like, for me, what I eat really messes with my body. And I'm noticing that. Like, when you and I were in college, man, I was putting down probably, 64 ounces of cola for breakfast, like, it was no big deal, biscuits and gravy and Coke, that was the beginning of my day. And it was just this constant drip all day long of cola, just put the IV in and here we go, and, well, I can't do that anymore. Like, it really messes with my body. And that's one of the, I guess you could say, the gifts of anxieties. It's kind of really tuned me into my body in a way that I've never been tuned before, where it's just realizing, how much exercise matters, and, how much learning to meditate or prayer meditatively, just learning to breathe well. There's all kinds of resources online. I know we're running out of time here. There's all kinds of resources online for this, and different. I think I've read a ton of stuff on anxiety and just working through that. Medication has been helpful for me. So, but I would say if you're not ready to go down that route, finding arenas where you can actually be honest about your journey and what's going on, and then just kind of getting in touch with your fears and what's happening in your soul. I think those are really important things. And then just kind of bringing healthy rhythms into your life. I would say that one area that has been very, very important for me has been dealing with the wounds, the deeper wounds, and the messages that I've grown to believe through my wounds. John Eldredge calls them agreements. And his ministry through ransomedheartministries.com has been massive for me. It's just been huge. I went to the Wild at Heart boot camp this past year, and it's just been really, really spectacular for me to really get into the messages of my soul that drive me and that really push forward my anxiety. And these messages are just built, they're built straight out of my wounds. And they're a huge part of my anxiety. So for me, anxiety is this road of battling it is a multifaceted road. There's a physical component. There's a mental, emotional component. There's a spiritual component, because I think we have an enemy who is attacking. And for anybody who's a church planner or pastor, bivocational pastor, like we're just naive to think that the enemy doesn't want to take us out. That's just naive to think that. that's not what we see in the scriptures. We have an enemy who clearly hates us and is clearly devoted to destroying everything the Lord wants to do. And we are people who serve him and build his kingdom. Of course, we are enemy. We are prime for attack. And so it's not just one or the other. You don't just exercise a lot. It's having all those things in it. It's this multifaceted approach.
Yeah. Well, Ryan, I appreciate all the time that you've taken here with us and to share everything that you have. It's been great, because I think there's a lot of people who are going to hear this who need to hear what you have to say. So thank you for being willing to be that vulnerable and to share that stuff, and even, starting it out there on Facebook, which is kind of crazy, because no one does that.
Yeah. Well, if I could just say one thing as we're closing, I have, I'm a pastor, but I'm passionate about pastors. I love all you guys, and look me up on Facebook. You got questions you need to dump, look me up, ask me to be your friend. I'll be your friend. I will never ask you to buy anything from me or anything else. Just, email me any questions you've got. I'm happy to talk with you, and happy to listen. So
awesome. Do you want to give them your email on the podcast? If you want to, go for it. I mean,
you can email me at Ryan. It's RyanLow 4 at Gmail. So RyanLow 4 at Gmail, or you can look me up on Facebook. Ryan Low is my name, and there's a picture of my kids and I sitting out on the Capilano Suspension Bridge. That's my profile picture. So if you can. That's actually my cover picture. So, but anyway, if you see me, invite me to be your friend. I'm happy to do that. I'm trying to have more friends than my dad. So, he'll get really jealous. I'm kind of kidding about that. So
cool. Awesome. Well, again, Ryan, thanks so much, man. I appreciate you taking the time, and we gotta talk more often. I mean, once every 20 years, it's not enough, man.
Yeah, I know. And well, now that I know you're in Orange County, shoot, just give me a reason.
Exactly. Well, it's free down here. We're not nearly as in jail as you guys up there. So, and I'm like a mile out of LA County. So, I mean, I'm really close. Cool,
but
man.
I could see it. I could hear it in your voice, the freedom that you have.
We don't have enough, though. One of the things, man, I've definitely gone off the deep end since college. I am much more of a freedom lover than ever before. In fact, I do another podcast with another pastor out in Ohio. It's called the From Concealment Podcast, because we're both gun enthusiasts. And for like the last 8 weeks, all we've been talking about is coronavirus and tyranny, and just, we need to be free people. I mean, it's actually been quite funny. But anyway, man, thanks so much. And we'll talk to you soon. Take care.
All right. Thanks, man.
Thanks for joining us for another weekly episode of the Church Planter Podcast with Pete Mitchell and Peyton Jones. We'd love to hear your comments on this episode of the Church Planter Podcast. Visit us online and let us know what you thought at churchplanterpodcast.com. If you subscribe to us via iTunes and have enjoyed the podcast, leave us a positive review. The more positive reviews we receive in iTunes, the more iTunes will promote us to other church planners who would benefit from this show. This podcast is brought to you by the Church Planter Magazine, which is available in the iTunes newsstand or online via churchplantermagazine.com.